Hey y'all, I'm Marty. This is my musings. Let's get rolling. For my first item, it was just announced that Eurazeo, a private equity firm that owns the Asmodee Group, is looking to actually sell Asmodee. Right now, the asking price for the Asmodee Group is going to be $1.7 billion. Now that's pretty good, seeing as how Eurazeo bought the company in 2014 for $143 million. Now granted, during that time, they've been buying a lot of other companies such as Fantasy Flight Games, Plaid Hat Games, Days of Wonder. They bought the Catan license. They got Z-Man Games. Z-Man just recently bought the Love Letter license, so they've really built that brand. And that's what private equity companies do. They buy a company, they build it up, they turn around and sell it for a profit. Much like people do when they buy a house, fix it up, and then flip it for some extra money. So the question is, who is going to buy this? Now, one of the obvious choices is Hasbro, that large toy manufacturer that already owns Parker Brothers, which manufactures games such as Sorry, Monopoly, Clue, etc. And they own Wizards of the Coast, which has Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. So that seems like that would be a pretty good fit. They've already got the infrastructure for handling the hobby side of games to buy Asmodee, bring them in and build up their catalog even more and grow that business. And then keeping along the line with toy companies, Mattel, maybe they're an option. They're also a big toy manufacturer here in the United States and around the world, and they don't have a lot of board game offerings right now, so they might be able to see this as a potential way to get into that market, bring a catalog of games and be able to maybe compete against Hasbro, because right now Mattel has been hurting. In fact, this past year, Hasbro topped the sales of Mattel for the first time since 1993. And Mattel just recently announced that its earnings dropped 11% in 2017, so they may be kind of scrambling, looking for something or some way to compete. And what better way than to look at this growing board game market and go ahead and buy a company that has a lot of game offerings already, bring them under the Mattel umbrella and sell them that way. But let's look outside of the toy companies. Maybe there's another company out there that wants to get into board games and maybe compete. Maybe somebody that already owns a lot of intellectual properties that are very popular right now. Who could that be? Yeah, Disney. Disney has tons of money. They've bought the Marvel IP. They have the Star Wars licenses. Fantasy Flight Games is already making card games and model games based on Star Wars, and maybe they want to jump into this market too, and they definitely got the cash to be able to do something like that and broaden their horizons beyond movie studios and theme parks and ESPN and ABC. They own a lot of stuff. So here's my question to you. Who do you think Asmodee might be bought by? Is it somebody that I mentioned? Is it somebody else? Let me know in the comments. The Spiel des Jahres Awards were just announced and people are excited to talk about it. The Dice Tower Awards were just announced and people are excited to talk about it. The Origins Gaming Awards were just announced and people are excited to talk about it. What is the deal with awards? Every time awards are announced in any type of thing, people just get excited to want to talk about it. Whether it be in board games or the Emmys or the Oscars, it's just like as soon as they're announced, there's a lot of buzz. And why is that? I think maybe within the board game hobby, it's because we see these games that come out over the course of the year, and maybe we get attached to them and play them and like them a lot, and then we want to see them get recognized. So when these awards are announced and the nominations come up, people quickly check the list and see if their favorite game happens to be on there. If they are, it gives them a little sense of pride, like, ooh, I played that one, I like that one, that one's good, I got something to pull for. Plus, people like to pull for winners, so they have to have a favorite game in a specific genre or category that they're going to pull for, and then have their fingers crossed that it wins, and then celebrate when it does. But that's just like with movies and TV shows. I remember last year during the summer when I went and saw Dunkirk in the movie theaters, and as soon as I saw it, I thought, this is something that might be up for an Oscar. So when it was announced, hey, I followed along with it. I actually followed the Oscars and then see if it won and was pulling for it that night. I think games are just going to be the same way. You get attached to a particular game or a couple of games and you just want to see it recognized in some way. So with these three big award nominations just announced, people are going to be following it over the next several months. And that also makes me think too, how did these games get nominated? And probably each of them are a little bit different. I can only speak to one type of award, and that's the Dice Tower Awards, and that's because I'm on the nomination group. That's a group of like over 100 people that Tom Vassell from the Dice Tower has set up, and at the end of each year he has a list of categories that comes out for the types of awards that are going to be given. At that time, everybody gets to nominate as many games as they want to, and they take the top games from each of those categories and there are your nominations for each of them. And now that they've been announced, everybody gets to get a ballot and then they'll vote on their favorite games in each category. Now for me, some of these awards are easier to vote on than others, like the best graphics or best graphic design. That's a subjective thing, true, but I can look at a game and say, oh, I really like the art on that or the way that's laid out, etc. It's when it comes to the games that are like the best in the category for maybe a party or two-player game or best game overall, because then it comes down for me for fun. And fun is a very subjective thing. How do you measure fun? There's not a unit for fun. What I might think is fun, somebody else might think is really boring. So typically in these types of games, when people vote for their favorite game, it's just an experience that they had, they really enjoyed it, and so it tends to get more votes. And I guess the thing with awards is those games that tend to have the most fun for the most people end up winning overall. But again, it's a very subjective thing, so if your game doesn't win, doesn't mean it's a bad game, doesn't mean people don't appreciate it. It's just that it so happens one is more popular in this fun category or art category or graphic design category, then it just happened to win overall. Still, it's fun to watch, and I'll be keeping up with the awards to see who wins. Plus, with games that are coming out this year, I'll already start making my list for nominations at the end of this year. Last topic I want to talk about, Evergreen titles. Now, an evergreen title or an evergreen game is a game that sells continually well throughout the year, year after year. Prime examples of that are Catan, Ticket to Ride, Pandemic. Those are the type of games that still are on people's shelves and they still come out and get played on the table. And it's typically too, in my personal experience, is when you want to teach somebody a new game, or somebody says, hey, what's a good game to teach somebody that's never played? Those games still tend to rise to the top because so many people own them, so many people know how to play them. They're more of a gateway game. They're a little bit easier to get into. And so those why just year after year, they get played, and then you bring in people to the hobby and you teach them Ticket to Ride, then they want to go buy a copy. So it's just kind of a self-perpetuating thing. That's an evergreen title. But what got me thinking is, why don't we see a lot of evergreen titles anymore? When you look at those games that I just mentioned, like Catan came out in 1995. Ticket to Ride was in 2004. Pandemic was in 2008. I went out to Amazon. I looked at the top games that have been sold in the game category, and there's a lot of different games that show up in the top 10 that aren't hobby games, but the four hobby games actually that showed up were Catan, Pandemic, Ticket to Ride, and Codenames. Now, Codenames is a newer game. It came out in 2015. So there's an example of a game that has now earned evergreen status, that it sells well year after year. So I'm not saying that it's not impossible for an evergreen title to come out anymore. I just think it's going to be harder and more rare for it to happen. If you look back in 2008, there were 2,500 games that were released, and that's according to Board Game Geek. In 2017, there were 3,700 games released, and it's a big difference in game that's released from year to year, so it's harder for that one title to come out, grab hold, and take over. In fact, even publishers know how hard it is for a game to come out and catch fire and earn that evergreen status. In fact, Christian Peterson, who is the head of Asmodee North America, was asked about marketing games and how he sells and everything, and he had this following quote: I've also heard from many sources in the industry that the tale of games has been affected too when it comes to the kind of boom and bust mentality. A game comes out, if it doesn't hit in the first 2 weeks, it's done, and you move on. Whereas in years past, games had a little more time to find their feet and take root with an audience. Did you catch that? He's saying that a game comes out, it has 2 weeks, 14 days for it to catch hold and then start spreading. And if it doesn't happen, it's a bust and you move on. That's crazy. Some games take years to develop, and you put all this money and resources into it, and then it comes out, and then you say, oh, well, it didn't make it after 2 weeks. I guess it wasn't a good one, or it didn't take off like they hoped it would. That's really a tough market to play in right now. So you see the kind of pressure these publishers are under when they're having to compete against 3,500 games that come out each year, which is also why it's tougher for an evergreen title to come out now, because again, if it doesn't catch in that 2 weeks, it may be done. And then if it does last for 2 weeks, it needs to catch hold and gain sales and get played. But a lot of us do have that cult of the new mentality right now, which is a very bad thing to have in this kind of hobby when there's so many games coming out. And because of that, we get excited about a game, a new one comes out, and maybe we want to try it, and then we don't play that other one as much. So in conclusion, I'm not saying that an evergreen title will never come out again. I'm just saying that in the past, it was easier for Evergreen titles to be developed, especially when those Evergreen titles are still popular today. There's a reason why Asmodee wanted Catan, because it's still a good moneymaker. It still sells year after year, and it's kind of like a staple product that they can have on the shelves. So here's my question to you. Are there any current games, maybe in the past 4 or 5 years, that you view as an evergreen? It's one of those that you keep seeing coming to the table time after time. If you know a game like that or games like that, please let me know in the comments. Finally, for this episode's interesting fact, cell phone manufacturer Samsung tests phones with a butt-shaped robot. I wonder if there's a butt model for that. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe to this channel. I put one of these out every 2 weeks, and also on those alternate weeks, we have our podcast episode, Rolling Dice and Taking Names, that comes out at rolldicetakenames.com on iTunes, or it's actually posted here. You can also follow us on Twitter at Dice and Names. Join our BGG Guild 1589. I've been Marty Connell, and that's been my take.